Watching and filming?
Well, I grew up, I think often you have to go away from somewhere until you notice what's really around you, and that was certainly the case with me in that I grew up skiing in Mittersill. I have an Austrian mother, and I just was part of, I guess, how I grew up. I didn't really realize how it was different maybe than other parts of skiing and elsewhere in the world or in America. But it was only by going over to a family gathering in Austria where I went over there and skied with my cousins, and then I proceeded to go to, I was going through my ski instruction certification at the time, and I went up to the Autoberg, and I happened to talk to a shop owner, and the shop owner said, "Oh, do you know Christoph Schneider?" And I said, "No," and she said, "I think you really should follow up with him," and she gave me his phone number, and I called him. That's the grandson of Hannes Schneider, and we ended up skiing for a couple days together, and I started to realize, started to make connections about what I had experienced growing up at home, and under the direction of the Villars, who were the ski school directors at Mittersill and Cannon, and through them I came home and started doing some interviews, and then I realized there was a much bigger story than just Franconia or Mount Cranmore. And I've come to know, after doing this film, there's way more connections even than that. Hannes Schneider had a profound influence on throughout the world. I mean, even skiing in Southern California, a professor I think zoology started the first ski huts in Southern California, and he was also a disciple of Hannes Schneider. And that term, by the way, disciples, came from the people I interviewed. That's what they call themselves.
Where do you live now?
I grew up in the Boston area, and I'm still in the Boston area, but I have extensive. I have worked also in New Mexico. I actually have my family ties are with Austria and Irish with my father, but I now have another part of my life, which is represented through my son. My wife is Guatemala, and I've spent a lot of time in Latin America too. So I actually go back and forth between Latin America, and I have a real interest in doing a film series similar to this on Native America, the three continents. That's actually my background in my studies is more. My academic background was more about the Americas and the Native Americans, and that's why I was in New Mexico. I worked as a head of a charter school for Native Americans. So this is, I don't know if you caught it, if you were to see part 3 of the series, which is about the Stratton Ski School, I was really trying to capture a culture, not so much as just a sport. And the way I guess you could associate with, I see there are a couple sports in the world that kind of represent or identify a nation, and with skiing it's certainly Austria, but I see similarities with Brazil and soccer, maybe, and certainly Canada with hockey. I mean, just when I went to visit, in part 3, I interviewed the heli-ski pioneers, which were also Austrians in Canada, and when I went to go interview them, I stopped at some bars, and that's all there is, hockey. And it was amazing, same thing as in Austria with skiing, but there are a few nations that are very much tied to a sport which is more than just a sport. It's a whole way of life, a whole way of living. Actually, I have a real passion for soccer too, so I'm dying to go to the World Cup and the next World Cup in Brazil. That would be an interesting film too.
Did you do all or most of the interviews in the movie?
Yes, I would go to the sites and talk with the people who I interviewed the day before. They gave me research, and then we go with a camera person and do the interviews in English and then in German. And we do them right after another. And then Austrian television then broadcast.
You better show us part 3 now.
Well, part 3 it ends with the heli-ski pioneers and sort of projects out into the future of skiing.
Yeah. You say it's going to be on educational TV?
Well, it's been on. Right now, the New Hampshire Public TV has picked it up and is using it as a pledge program, and then they're going to show the whole series. I don't know just how. I think probably once a week, because it's actually 4 parts, 4 hours. And it, as I said, it went from one thing to another. It went from the initial interviews with the Villars and to the Schneiders to I found out there was another generation, a somewhat younger generation than this one you saw, and then I found out about the heli ski pioneers. So it just kind of.
When did you start interviewing people? Because some of those people have been dead for a number of years.
Yeah, it was around. It was just before the Salt Lake Olympics. So the first interviews was in 2001, and I finished part 1 and this part in 2005, and then 2007 and then 2009 was part 3.
Well, come back and show us 3 now.
And one.
Yeah, well, the first part of this is what you didn't see was the legacy of Hannes in Austria, and that's very interesting. Just how skiing basically started and how it came. And Otto Lang, there's an interview with Otto Lang in part 1 where he'd never seen a skier. This is in pre-World War I, and he's like astounded seeing this guy coming out of the trees and skiing, and he goes, "I want to do that." But skiing was how skiing came to be, and that what most people don't know, which I found fascinating, that skiing came to be mainly through Hannes Schneider starring in ski films. And the ski films, then nobody was skiing. They thought it was crazy, and to live in the mountains in Austria before skiing was considered kind of almost being in a prison in the mountains, because what do? You're snowed in and you can't farm, and you're just kind of hunkered down. But once skiing came about, it also provided a big economic boom. But it only happened because Hannes Schneider was caught on film, and they started doing these films, and they showed them in Germany, and then the Germans started to rush into Austria to start skiing, and those films then went around the world, and they came to America, and then the Americans went over there to ski with who? Well, the one name that was known was Hannes Schneider, and so his ski school just took off and started, and he recruited the local farm boys, and then they all of a sudden had all these people coming, these wealthy people coming from all over the world. So you can imagine what a boom it was for those areas. But that's how skiing really became an international sport and became well known.
The Brits pretty much did it in Switzerland.
Yeah, Sir Arnold Lund was the head of the Kandahar Ski Club and the British Ski Club, and they started the first slalom races, and they were skiing in Switzerland, but right around the same time with what was going on in St. Anton in Austria. But really Hannes Schneider became sort of the leading figure in skiing for a long time.
I just had a question about, it was a little slurring about the French. Austria, I come from a French background, but I'm just curious, like, say, in Chamonix and the alpine resorts in France, did they develop their own techniques, or did Hannes Schneider play a role in helping to develop ski schools in France as well?
No, well, the difference there was in Austria was that I can't really speak to the French experience, but I know that in Austria, the ski instruction profession became a real profession at a very early time, because it was state sponsored. These Bundessportheim, which is the sport academy, were state sponsored. The French, of course, have a great ski tradition too, but I think that in Austria it was just even further, that much more than maybe in the other countries. Also because there's a bigger chunk of Austria that's mountainous, whereas in France it's only a part of France. But certainly the French ended up becoming very strong and a big influence, especially with the appearance of Emile Allais, who was a pioneer of the zone. He came over here too, and he was the ski school director at Squaw Valley for a number of years. But it was the Austrians that were predominant in the alpine world, just in large part. I think you might have caught some of that because of the war. They had more reason to come here maybe than the French. The French maybe had more opportunities after World War II within France, whereas the Austrians were just pretty much wiped out from all sides, economically, politically, and socially too. Well, they were occupied too, so anybody that could wanted to get out. And it's the immigration story. Once a group of people that you know have already gone over, you want to go and join them, and you see that they're making money, and they made a heck of a lot more money. And a ski instructor here for an Austrian made a lot of money, because if you think of those times, the exchange rate was hugely in their favor by going back. So they made a lot of money here and would go home in some cases and build restaurants and hotels with the money they made here just as ski instructors. That's like unfathomable today. The ski instruction profession has really gone into the toilet. I know, it's terrible. That's part of the reason I did this film, that the culture and that it's been so corporatized life in general that the whole ski profession, well, not profession, the ski industry is more about real estate, and it's not about, before the ski world was built around the ski schools and the whole relationship that was developed between the network between the teachers and the students, and it was a real profession. It was paid well, relatively well.